Hello and welcome to the qualifying edition for the Race Weekend Data Analysis Pilot Series for the Hungarian Grand Prix of 2020. My name is Alex Does F1 Stuff and welcome to this pilot series where I'm aiming to get your input into all of this data that I'm about to present to you, as it can chop and change from episode to episode. And that is in order for me to absolutely nail this series for 2021, so I don't end up having to change all of the data and all of the visuals and everything like that. I can keep everything 100% and crystal clear consistent from episode 1, round number 1, all the way to the season's finale. Now, I've taken on board some of the comments from the previous episode and I've decided to split Hungary up into 3 individual episodes over 3 days. That is the practice data, the qualifying data, which is this episode, and then tomorrow is the race data. I'll link the practice episode in a card in the corner. But without further ado, we will jump on into the qualifying data for the Hungarian Grand Prix of 2020. And we start, of course, with the leaderboards of qualifying, and we pull up Q1 first, and that is headed by the 2 racing points ahead of Lewis Hamilton and the 2 McLarens from Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari, with Charles Leclerc all the way down in P13. Both the Williams have made it through, with Russell in P9 and Latifi in P15. But out, however, are the 2 Haas cars, Danny Kvyat in the Alfa Tauri, a shock exit in Q1, and the 2 Alfa Romeo cars at the back. And then we pull up the positions for Q2, and this is led by the 2 Mercedes, 1 and 2, and then Max Verstappen in P3, Charles Leclerc boosting himself up to P4, with Norris splitting the 2 Ferraris, and Sainz then splitting the 2 racing points behind them, and Gasly in the AlphaTauri just squeezing himself into Q3, but out, however, are the 2 Renaults of Ricciardo and Ocon, Alex Albon in the Red Bull down in P13, and also the 2 Williams. And so that leaves us finally with Q3, which is dominated by the 2 Mercedes once again. Lewis Hamilton on pole position, Valtteri Bottas in P2 with the 2 racing points behind them, but a long way back. Then come the 2 Ferraris ahead of Max Verstappen, then the 2 McLarens, and then Gasly, who failed to set a time. And so the first thing that I can do with this is I can map on all of these lap times and I can produce a graph that looks a little something like this, showing their progression from Q1 on the left all the way to Q3 on the right. And sadly, this shows that the racing points were unable to keep up their strong pace in Q1 as they suffered a pace loss heading into Q2, but then the most significant gain in Q3 as well. And also Nicholas Latifi, he just went backwards from Q1 to Q2. There was a big fight between the Renaults and the AlphaTauris and George Russell as well, with the Red Bull of Max Verstappen getting lost in the midfield. So what does this look like in terms of Q1 to Q2 improvement and then Q2 to Q3 improvement? I can map on those in graphs that look a little something like this. So this is the Q1 to Q2 improvement, and we can see that Racing Point lost half a second going into the second part of qualifying, Williams just over a tenth, and Renault just half a tenth of a second, all the way up to Mercedes gaining 6.5 tenths from Q1 to Q2. And then looking at their Q2 to Q3 improvement, it is a very close battle between Mercedes and Racing Point, just 0.02 of a second in it, all the way down to Ferrari, a big 6/10 drop in gains, and then Red Bull and McLaren are battling with 0.08 of a second between their 2 improvements. Now, like I said in the practice episode, I'm still not 100% sure what to do with this data, whether it's still relevant or whether you guys actually like looking at it. I'm not 100% sure how else I can improve upon this or what else I can do with it. But now we will just take a look at some teammate battles. So we begin with Mercedes, and they are team number 1. And we start on the left with their positions graphs this time. So there is Q1 at the top, then Q2, and then Q3 all the way at the bottom. And you can see for the races that have happened so far, the first 3 of 2020, Mercedes have had the same Q2 and Q3 positions for each of these 3 rounds. And then in the middle we can map on their qualifying progressions, so these are their lap times mapped on here, and we can see that consistently Lewis Hamilton was faster than Valtteri Bottas, but that gap did close. Bottas managed to close it just a little bit towards Lewis Hamilton. And then underneath this, I can pop up their qualifying head-to-head battles, and it is 2-1 in favour of Lewis Hamilton in every single session. And then in the far top right, I can pull up their gaps in this session so far. So in Q1, it was just over half a second, and then it came down by almost half to 2.5 tenths of a second, and then that halved almost again to 1/10 of a second. So given another session, if it went to Q number 4, qualifying 4, Valtteri Bottas may well have overtaken Lewis Hamilton to get pole position. And then again, similarly to what I've done to practice, I have taken the averages of the previous 2 races qualifying gaps for each driver whenever they were ahead, and I've pulled up this graph that looks something like this. However, I've had to exclude rain-affected sessions such as Styria, so there is no data yet for Lewis Hamilton. But comparing the qualifying gaps, we can't really do that, as it is only Valtteri Bottas for round number 1 that is included in this average. And so with the pro forma all laid out, we can move on into team number 2, and that is Red Bull, and we can take a look at what that looks like. And we can see that Alex Albon didn't really make any progression whatsoever between Q1 and Q2. He was a very horizontal line compared to Max Verstappen, who made significant improvement from Q1 to Q2. It is 3-0 in favour of Verstappen, in Q1 and Q3, but 2-1 in favour of Verstappen in Q2. But again, we have the same issue as the Mercedes pair previous. We can't really compare the average gaps just yet, as there is only 1 race's worth of data in there, as Styria was rain affected. And with that, we move on into team number 3, and that is McLaren. And we can see that it is fairly even. It is 2-1 in favour of Carlos Sainz in Q1, 3-0 towards Lando Norris in Q2, and 2-1 in favour of Lando Norris in Q3. And both drivers had a fairly even gap ahead of each other in Q1 and Q2. It was 1.6 tenths of a second in favour of Carlos Sainz, but 1.8 tenths of a second in favour of Lando Norris for Q2, and then Norris managed to continue that pace on into Q3 by just 0.06 of a second. But again, we can't really compare this to the averages just yet, as there is only 1 race's worth of data in that list. And then we head to team number 4, and that is the Pink Panthers of Racing Point, and this is where Lance Stroll gets his own back. In the practice data, it was more towards Sergio Perez, but so far it is 2-1 in Q1, 2-1 in Q2 in favour of Lance Stroll, and 1 apiece in Q3 so far. And we can see that the gaps in the far right hand side were fairly consistent. It was 2 tenths ahead for Sergio Perez in Q1, but then almost the same gap, just 4 thousandths different in Q2, but in favour of Lance Stroll, and then that gap came down by about half a tenth of a second towards their Q3 gap. But again, we can't compare this yet to their average gaps, as it is only 1 race's worth of data. So we head on in to team number 5, and that is Renault, the black and yellow cars. And again, Daniel Ricciardo has a bit of a stranglehold over Esteban Ocon, but neither car made it into Q3. And so in the head-to-head, it is 2-1 towards Daniel Ricciardo in both Q1 and Q2, and then in Q3 it is 1 apiece for both drivers. And then rinse and repeat the same spiel about the average gaps, as I've said for the first 4 teams so far. And then we head on into team number 6, and that is Ferrari, the battle of the Scarlet Cars. And once again, Sebastian Vettel is very close to Charles Leclerc. He had an exceptionally good start to the season, it just faltered from there. The head-to-head, it is 2-1 in favour of Sebastian Vettel in Q1, 2-1 as well in Q3. However, Q2 is 2-1 in favour of Charles Leclerc. And also the gaps in the top right just show that they were getting ever closer and closer as the sessions progressed, chopping and changing positions every single session. And then from Ferrari, we head on into AlphaTauri and the battle between Gasly and Kvyat, and this is where Gasly has a little bit more of a stranglehold over the Russian. However, Q1, it is Danny Kvyat who has a 2-1 advantage. It is 3-0 to Gasly in Q2 and 1-0 in Q3, but neither driver managed to make it through in this session. So technically Gasly did make it through, he just didn't set a time in the session, so there should actually be a tick mark in his column in the head-to-head. It should be 2-0 in favour of Gasly. I need to rework my code a little bit to include that if they don't set a time but they do make it through, they still get a point in favour of the head-to-head battle. And then heading from one Alfa team to the second, and that is Alfa Romeo, the battle between Kimi Räikkönen and Giovinazzi. And with these last three teams, we head into a little bit of not a lot of data, basically. There's lots of zeros, and in terms of their positions charts, there's not a great deal to show. But it is 2-1 in favour of Giovinazzi in Q1, with a gap of just 1/10 of a second between the two drivers. And then we head to the penultimate team of today's episode, and that is the American-owned Haas team between Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean. And it is Magnussen who heads Grosjean 2-1 in Q1, however it is 1 apiece in Q2. And again, similarly to Alfa Romeo, there isn't a great deal of data that we can pull from these teams as they don't progress super far in qualifying. And with that, we move on into the last team of today's episode, and that is Williams, the battle between Russell and Latifi. And it is still a whitewash. It is 3-0 in favour of Russell in Q1 and 2-0 in favour of Russell in Q2 as well. But like the two teams previous, there is no data for Q3, and therefore it's a little bit lackluster in terms of information on this panel. And there we go, that is the qualifying data all round up for the Hungarian Grand Prix of 2020. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, if there's any information that you think I should include in this also, please let me know in the comments below, as that is the primary reason that I've launched this pilot series. But if you guys are interested in copying any official F1 merch, such as the Max Verstappen cap behind me, or anything inside this Drive Crate box, I'll pop a link to my Drive Crate unboxing for the season, or for the 2021 season preview box. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.